Good morning, everyone. Webinars like this have become the safe norm for knowledge sharing now, and I take a moment to thank Dr. K.G. Vishwanathan, the principal, and Dr. Rajesh J., the professor and head of the Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering, for having given me this opportunity. I also thank Professor Priya and Professor Joby James, who are the organizers of this webinar. Today's presentation is intended to give the participant a bird's eye view of what genomic signal processing is all about. And this webinar would be very low on mathematical rigor. Nevertheless, I hope it would provide an introductory glimpse to those among the attendees who have an inclination to pursue doctoral research or undertake and carry out short-term or long-term projects in this area. The presentation is organized as shown. We have an overview of molecular biology background. Good knowledge of molecular biology is mandatory in order to pursue any work in this area. So we start off with a short walk on molecular biology. Then we'll see briefly just a list of common DSP algorithms that have been put to use in genomic signal processing. Also, we'll see how a combination of classical DSP algorithms are implemented in a typical genomic problem. Now, these three sections are for the benefit of those of you who are planning to commence any kind of work in area, be it doctoral research or a short-term or a long-term project. Then after that, I'll run you through certain applications, in the sense, just a brief glimpse of certain applications of the study, of the vast study called genomics. We'll conclude with just a brief remarks. As I said, this area is very vast and I don't intend to complete even a bird's eye view about genomic signal processing, but let us say, I hope I give you a brief glimpse of what it is all about. Now, this is just a timeline of genetic studies, the high point of which is the discovery of the double helical structure of DNA. As we know, the work is going on. Now, genomic studies started, I'll say genetic studies started as early as 1856, when the observations of Gregor Mendel showed that there are certain factors that are passed on from the parent to the offspring. From his experiments with pollination, which are very commonly known as green pea, yellow pea experiment, he formulated what we call the laws of inheritance. And it was much later, in 1916, with the work of Walter Sutton, that these factors were identified to be present in chromosomes. Now, much later in 1933, the work of T.H. Morgan showed that these entities, which he called as genes, were contained in chromosomes that were present in the nucleus of cells. And it was in 1953 that the double helical structure of DNA, as we know it today, was established by the work of Watson and Crick. Actually, it is said that the discovery of DNA per se happened much earlier, in 1869, when a Swiss researcher, Friedrich Miescher, accidentally separated the DNA molecule while working with lymphoid cells. He actually intended to separate the lymphoid cell. Instead, he ended up separating the DNA cell, the DNA polymer cell. So it reminds us of how Röntgen discovered X-rays. Now, this diagram is something most of you have seen many times over. This shows the structure of two biomolecules, DNA and RNA. There are two biomolecules, DNA and RNA. DNA and RNA are, we call them nucleic acids. They are present in living organisms and are responsible for storage of information of the organism, that is construction and maintaining of every cell in that organism. DNA is ribose nucleic acid and DNA is deoxyribose nucleic acid and RNA is ribose nucleic acid. So both DNA and RNA are composed of 4 types of bases. That is, you see them here marked in different colors. You have cytosine, both of them, both RNA and DNA have cytosine. Then you have guanine. Then there is the yellow one marked here is called uracil in the case of RNA, and the corresponding nucleotide is that it's called a base. It is thymine. in DNA, and you have these are the four different, the only four bases which are present in these nucleic acids. Now, these bases are bound to a sugar phosphate backbone, and one base plus the corresponding sugar phosphate backbone makes up what is called the nucleotide. Many such nucleotides are linked via covalent bonds to form one long nucleotide chain or the nucleotide polymer. DNA, as you see, has a double helical structure. In higher organisms, DNA is organized, is arranged together with, that is, it is actually, you say it is folded together with proteins into the chromosome. It is packed into the chromosome. And in human beings, there are 23 such pairs of chromosomes. In the DNA, you have two regions, the gene and the non-gene. And it is the gene region of the DNA which contains a blueprint of the information needed to form and maintain that organism. Now, RNA is, as I said, is another nucleic acid which you call the ribose nucleic acid. It is found outside the nucleus, whereas DNA is found inside the nucleus. So, needless to say, organisms which do not have a nucleus, that is like when you talk about single cellular organisms like bacteria or viruses, they do not have DNA, they have only RNA. Now this is the DNA, as we saw earlier, has a double helical structure. This double helix, when straightened out, has this appearance, like that of a ladder. The formation of DNA base pairs, these are called base pairs. See, you can see the base A is bound to the base T, the base C gets bound to G, and so on. And these are formed, base pairing is formed by weak hydrogen bonds, and one nucleotide is linked to the other by the strong covalent bond. And this is the polymer chain, the nucleic acid polymer chain. Now, when you talk about the genome, when you say genome, the term genome, it means you're talking about the entire set of DNA of an organism. So, when you say human genome, it means the entire set of DNA which makes up all the features and characteristics of human beings. The human genome has more than 3 billion base pairs. And if you take the genome of a species, that is, say, the humans, for example, Homo sapien, for example, it varies from individual to individual. So, genome is quite unique and personal, and it is definitely the blueprint of the person that you are in entirety. And the Human Genome Project, this was the project which lasted for 13 years from 1990 to 2003. It is named it's called HGP, and the human genome was completely mapped. It was the full entire mapping of human genome was carried out when this project was completed. And we can say, it's very right when we say that with the completion of the Human Genome Project, we have the comprehension of the most powerful blueprint ever, that is the blueprint to constructing a person. Now study of genome. So you know what genome is? Now study of genome is called genomics, and data relating to genome is called genomic data. And when concepts of signal processing are applied to analyzing genomic data, a very new branch of study has emerged. It is called genomic signal processing. Now, by virtue of its very nature, genomic data is conducive to signal processing because it is digital. All you need to do is map the 4-letter alphabet into appropriate numerical values. And you have many public databases where you have many public databases where genomic data is now available. It is easily accessible also. The next section we will see DSP algorithms for analyzing the gene. Now, when I talk about DSP algorithms, let us start from the beginning of genome analysis with a computer. So let us say it's very right to say that there is no dearth of computational algorithms in the analysis of genomic data. And it is quite correct if we say that the work on computational genomics started right at the very beginning of genomic studies. So this table gives you an idea how early work on computational genomics began. In 1946, we have the invention of the ENIAC, that is the old computer which worked on valves and occupied three, four, 5 rooms, we are told. Then it was followed by the announcement of the transistor in 1947. And in 1953, the helical structure of DNA was discovered. And in 1954, the first transistor-based computer came up. That is the computer, which is the analog computer. The first analog computer was invented in 1954. And you see, the computational guys didn't waste any time at all. They seem to have started work on the analog machine right away, and they came up with their results in 1957. So in 1957, the first literature on computational genomics is published. I'll show you this. See, if you search for this duration, that is in 53 to 60, you can find the number of hits I have. See, so that is so. It I just wanted to tell you that analysis of genomic data with computational methods is pretty well established, and it's been happening right from the time the analog computer was discovered. And very often in computational techniques, they make use of statistical analysis also. It is actually computational methods go hand in hand with statistical methods. Now, so we have seen that DSP methods is not the only way to analyze the genome, but rather you could say it is a novel way to look at the genome studies, and it has been proven that DSP methods can be very good a tool for genomic analysis. The first publication in what could be called as signal processing analysis of genomic data, it came up in 1989 when E.A. Shiver presented his work in an IEEE annual American conference. This is the paper. That is, this is the very first paper on genomic signal processing. Okay. This work was patented, and hence you would not find the kind of citations you would expect from such a breakthrough publication. Now moving on. The most classical and the most commonly used DSP algorithms, as well as the whole range of DSP algorithms, are employed in the analysis of the genome. And some of the classical algorithms and methods are one is Fourier analysis, which is very commonly used. Then you have the DCT, discrete cosine transform. It is used very commonly in, this is just one of the application, gene expression analysis. There are many instances where DCT is used. Then you have DWT, a very common and a very potential tool in signal processing. It can be used as a filter bank in gene identification, prediction of gene expression, in prediction of exon location. Then you have the Hilbert transform, those are also used. Then filters are very commonly used, like filters in the sense, all kinds of filters ranging from the classical IIR, FIR filters, which you do in your UG, to the adaptive, the Comb, Grimm, Bloom, Rake, I mean, you name it, they have it. So you can use all kinds of filters in genomic analysis. Now, no matter what DSP algorithm you use, the first step is to convert the genomic sequence into numerical arrays. That is, it has to be a one-to-one mapping. And there are these are some very common methods used. Now, this is not a all-inclusive list. There are other methods also. These are the common methods used. You have what is called the converting the sequences to what are called indicator sequences. That is, I'll explain this in detail. Then you have what are called the complex conjugate representation. Then you have the EIP values of representation. Then you have representation with integers. Now you take, I'll just briefly explain how this is done. So this is a character string. It is 10 characters long. You can see this would represent the one half of the helix. Okay, so this would be the DNA string, and it has 10 characters. And for this particular string, 4 binary arrays are formed, each for 4 of the bases. That is, you have an array for A, one for T, one for C, and the other for G. All these arrays have length, should have length n, which is the length of the nucleotide sequence. Here it is 10. And these arrays have an entry 1 or 0 at location small n, depending on whether that particular base is present or absent respectively, such that the binary sum of these arrays will give you 1 always. So that is how, this is called the binary representation, or the sequences formed that the UA, UT, UC, UG sequences formed are called indicator sequences. Then you have what is called the complex conjugate representation. That is, you multiply, you have to separate, first you separate the genomic sequence into arrays, binary arrays, and after that you multiply each of the binary sequences with certain multiplicants. That is, in the case of complex conjugate representation, you make use of these multiplicants. So this is 1 plus j for A, and for T you use 1 minus j. And for C, you have minus 1 minus j, and for G, you have minus 1 plus j. That is a complex conjugate representation. You have another representation which makes use of EIIP. That is EIIP stands for electron ion indication potential. So this is how, these are the EIIP values. No, I'm not going into the details of the methods of derivation or anything. I just wanted to convey that. Whatever be the technique adopted, if you are going in for a DSP platform, you convert the array into the alphabet array, the array of letters into numerical sequences. Now, we'll see a sample genomics problem and the DSP method of tackling it. We are making use of a combination of DSP algorithms to tackle it. Now the problem is, I'll say it is, we call it gene splicing. Now what is gene splicing? Now when you consider a DNA sequence, as I told you earlier, you have a portion of the DNA sequence is called the gene, and the other region is called non-gene. So the ones indicated here in the purple color would be the gene, and the yellow is the non-gene. So in the DNA, you have the gene and the non-gene, and when you take the gene and when you look closely into the gene, you see you have introns and exons. Exon is this region, in red is the exon, and the region in green is the intron. Now, as we know, it is a gene in the DNA which stores our blueprint, and it is a gene that actively involves in the construction and maintenance of all the cells in the body, a process that goes on as long as we are alive. So this tells you why studying the gene is of utmost importance. Now, in the gene, the exon region, as I said, the exons and the introns. Exons are removed from the gene and they are copied into RNA sequence during the production of protein. That is, it is the, as I said, you have, in order to maintain cells, in order, that is, you have cells are produced, cells die, cells are replaced. This happens, and there is cell maintenance also, repair. That happens throughout the lifespan of any organism. And this happens directly from these regions called exons, which are marked in red here. So we say protein coding. We call this process as protein coding. So protein coding is actually protein construction. Each time there is a construction or maintenance of cell, you have what is called protein coding happening. Now, and this process of removing the intron and then making use of the exons in order to produce protein, that is called splicing. So, so at hand, the problem we have now is the splicing problem, that is predicting the exons in a gene sequence, and or we can call it exon mapping also. Now, this can be tackled by making use of a set of classical DSP algorithms. Now, this is just a representation of the exon and the intron in the gene. You have exons and introns. Not always like alternatively like this, it depends. Now, the coding regions are exons. So, we say coding regions have some property called a particular property. It is called the period 3 property or the 3 periodicity. Now, the 3 periodicity is that spectral energy of the 4 binary signals, that is the indicator sequences which I explained earlier. The spectral energy of those 4 binary signals representing the protein coding region exhibits what is called a peak, a single peak at frequency 2 pi by 3. At omega 2 pi by 3, that is, if you look at the DFT, at omega 2 pi by 3, you would detect a peak. You would expect a peak in the region where there is an exon. And this property is made use of in picking up the exons from DNA. So, you would expect if you have a single peaking filter at 2 pi by 3, it is very easy to pick up that particular peak in the energy spectrum. So this property is called the period 3 property, and it is capitalized in order to detect exons. Now, this would be the, if x of n is the binary sequence, I mean, if x of n represents the genomic sequence, you have the 4 indicator sequences separated, and then you find the DFT by making use of the FFT algorithm like this. Actually, in this case, DFT is computed by making use of short time Fourier transform. The same algorithm is used, FFT algorithm is used, but you, instead of computing the DFT at one single go, you compute the STFT, the short time Fourier transform, making use of overlapping windows. And the window length is selected to be a multiple of 3 in order to capitalize on the 3 periodicity. And so when this is done by an IEF filter with a high Q factor, and I made use of the simple implementation, the direct form 2 implementation. It is set to give the, it is seen to give the results very well. This is the general transfer function of the direct form 2 implementation, and this would be the magnitude and the frequency response of the filter used. As I said, it is a high Q filter. This is the blue shows the magnitude response. Now, then you have, even when such a sharp filter is used, you can see that it is seen that the energy, the peaks in the energy spectrum corresponding to the exon locations were found to be distorted with noise. Hence, DWT was used. The discrete wavelet transform was used for denoising. This is the this represents the equation for subband coding with the discrete wavelet transform. What I found was that a 2-level decimation and reconstruction was found to remove noise. That is, you you decimate up to 2 levels using the Dubochet's wavelet, and the higher frequency components were ignored discarded during the reconstruction. So that's because the noise was too large, occupied noise occupied the higher frequency range. So noise was removed when reconstruction was done, ignoring the higher frequency. This is just a representation of subband coding using DWT. You know this. That is, you have the frequency, the signal being divided into the lower and the upper half, and then further decimated and so on. Okay. Now, this is this diagram, this is a plot of it's an exon map of the human gene called osteomodulin. It has 2 exons, and these 2 exons are located exactly as it is given in biological databases. And this is my publication, which came up in BMC Bioinformatics. This is one of my earlier publications. Now, we go on to the next section, that is literature. That is, I told you the 3 sections following are especially intended for people who are young scholars who are looking towards working in genomic signal processing, be it a small project, a long project, or doctoral research. Now, literature, as you know, forms a vital part of any research, be it looking for ideas, fixing on a point to start your work, collecting data, publishing work, and the like. So when we talk about literature, the key aspects to focus on are the publisher. Publisher in the sense, that is, publisher is the address of the journal. Okay, the journal is of course published by a publisher. Now you have, when you talk about the publisher, you talk about the journal also. You have open access and paid journals. Now, what are open access journals? Open access journals are the ones you commonly see on the net. You don't have to pay to use it. The key publishers in the area for open access journals are BMC. BMC stands for Biomed Central, Springer, Elsevier, Nature, Science Direct, PLOS, that is Public Library of Science, IEEE. Then you have paid journals. All these publishers have paid journals also. They have expensive subscriptions. Oxford, Wiley, Sage, Springer, Elsevier, all those are publishers of paid journals. Those are also very good journals. If you have an institution subscription, you might as well make use of the rich resources of a paid journal. Then another factor you think of is the indexing. Now, indexing is considered to be the reflection of the quality. Index journals are considered to be of higher scientific quality as compared to non-index journals. So you try to associate with index journals as far as possible. Now this shows you, you have heard about SCI indexing, SCA indexing. This would show you the list of journals which are SCI indexed. This is updated. This is a dynamic site. It gets updated every year. Then the impact factor, that is another metric which is used for open access journals. Actually, paid journals would not have an impact factor because very few privileged people get to refer to paid journals. So paid journals, impact factor is not an indicator of visibility in the case of paid journal, whereas for open access journals, it is actually an indicator of visibility. Now I'll show you how. This is just a look at. This is BMC Bioinformatics. This is a very popular and very often referenced publisher. Now this shows the journal metric of BMC Bioinformatics. See the impact factors written here. You see 3.242, the 2-year impact factor. You have the 5-year impact factor, and so on. So these are the usage metrics. So we can. Actually, a 2-year impact factor. So when I say in 2020, they're saying they have 3.242. That is their impact factor for the past 2 years. So that is a usage metrics for 2018 and 19. This is for 5 years. That is from 2014 to 2019. This is their usage metric. So, and if you want to know more about them, see, you have a DORA. There is a forum called DORA, which actually has been constituted to normalize calculation of impact factors. So one fine morning, I can't start a journal and say, well, as on today, my impact factor is 9.99. I can't say that. That is wrong. So you have to, when you see new journals claiming to have impact factors of 9 and so on, I mean, you have to think again and check whether they are speaking the truth. Okay. Then actually this is a journal which talks about impact factor. You can see, read and find out for yourself how impact factor is calculated. I mean, when you are about to embark on a journey into research, you need to have just some idea about what journals claim of themselves. Okay. Now, these are some of the key journals in the area of genomics studies. Biomed Central, as I've shown you this already. This is Elsevier. Just take a look at this. Elsevier, you know, is a very reputed publisher. They have publications in all realms, including physics, chemistry, biology, from geosciences, everything. So here, look at their impact factor. Their impact factor is only 7.051. Okay, so when Elsevier's Genomics, Proteomics, and Bioinformatics journal has an impact factor of only 7. So you have to think again when some people claim that they have an impact factor of 9.9. Okay, that is the point I want to convey. And this is another one, Science Direct. Of course, Science Direct is another very reputed publisher, and their impact factor is just 6.205. Okay, so. So that is, the impact factor has to be calculated in a normalized way. Only then is it correct. So I cannot calculate my own impact factor. There is a standardization. There is a global standardization for that. All right. Now, we'll see some of the softwares and platforms commonly used. Of course, MATLAB is the first thing which comes to everybody's mind because we have been hearing about MATLAB the very moment we enter a UG course. So MATLAB is neither free nor open source, and there are many other softwares similar to MATLAB. They are actually very compatible with MATLAB. Magma, Maple, Mathematica. They are written in C or CPP. They run on Windows, Mac, or Linux. But you have a lot of very smarter, free, open source alternatives to MATLAB. The GNU Octave, Julia, SageMath, CLab, etc. Those are just, this list I would say is just the scratch at the top of a very, very long list actually. You have multitudes of smarter alternatives to MATLAB. Now, we'll see some of the popular genomics enabled open source platforms. They come with the GPL, the General Public License. It is free. Those are free softwares. Also, they are open source. Now, BioJava, BioPerl, etc. very very popular, and you can use it in conjunction with any other software also. GROWMAX. These are all very popular and very easy to use platforms. Now, in this context, let me discuss just a few points. That is, why licensed software, why open source software, and why a genomics-enabled platform. Now, why would you need to work on a licensed software? Now, usage licenses of proprietary softwares like MATLAB are, they are expensive. Unless you have a provision to install and use these licensed versions, you are kind of involved in what you could call software piracy, and that is illegal. And it would prove to be a hitch when it comes to getting published with reputed publishers like Springer, Elsevier, BMC, Sage, Science Direct, Nature, etc. They definitely ask you the platform you're working on, and they definitely ask you to quote the license number. You can't bluff there. There is always a chance of them checking and finding out the truth, and you might not always be ready to share the truth if you're into piracy. Okay, and also you'll see shortly that in this area of work there are a lot of web resources to which you can contribute the tool you develop, so that the academic and the research fraternity benefit directly from your work. And needless to say, you need to have developed your code on a licensed platform in order to do so, or else you would be reluctant to share your work. Also, if you're looking to patent your work, then also you need to be sure that you are using a licensed platform. Now, why would you prefer to work on an open source software? Open source, of course, is the same thing as the visibility of your work and the availability of your work to the academia and research fraternity. Open source softwares or platforms enable they give you a chance to add the tool you develop to their tool set. So that way, knowledge sharing is also accomplished. Knowledge sharing is one spirit of research. Now, why do you need a genomic-enabled platform? Even if you're focusing on digital signal processing, at some stage you might need the results of a preliminary workup from a computational module. So it is always handy to have access to a genomic-enabled platform. All right. Now, we'll take a brief look at the common repositories and resources. These are the vital resources of work in genomic analysis. This is NCBI. NCBI stands for National Center for Biotechnology Information. That is a US database. Just take a look at this. This is by far the most popular and often used resource. You can submit your these here the actually the data which goes into these websites are the results of biological labs. That is, we call them wet labs. Microbiologists and who work in wet labs, biotechnology, the results of biotechnologists research work of biotechnologists that is being they contribute their work to this. So you get sequences, you have gene expressions and all sorts of data here. You can submit your data. This is a very good site. I mean, it's a very potent site. Then I'll just show you how. See, I showed you the exon plot of this gene called osteomodulin. I'll show you how you can download this from the NCBI website. This is the gene accession number. See, this AB009589.1 is actually the accession number of the gene. So it is the details are here. Homo sapien gene for osteomodulin. The complete series is here. That is a complete data and the sequence. This is the sequence. This the sequence is this long. So when you're talking about genomic data analysis, you're talking about matrices which are of, this is the smallest, I guess. Now you can download this. You can download this from the site you have. You use the whatever format your platform wants you to. I mean, the one which is readable to your platform, and then you can download this. I mean, finding out data and using the right kind of data is crucial in genomic signal processing, even when you're working in computational genomics or DSP. Now, another archive is a European Nucleotide Archive. It is the EU. We had actually restricted access to it. Now I think it is okay. Like at certain times, your access gets restricted if you're, unless you're, of course, you're using a proxy to log in. Now it is okay. Then you have this. This is also a very good database, the Israeli database. They also have, this is as good as the NCBI database. They also have, I think it is as large as the US database. The resources they have and the data they share in this. Then you have the Japanese database. It's also very good, but I guess the Israeli database and the US database are the best in the area. Then this is GenomeNet. That is a Japanese network of databases. That is, if you log into this, if you get an account in this, you get connected to a network of all their databases. Then this is MIRBase. MIRBase is a database specifically for one particular kind of RNA called microRNA. That is, this is a repository for microRNA alone. That is just one kind of RNA. This is actually, this is not state-owned, it is privately owned. It is by some private research lab. Then you have the European Molecular Biology Lab. This is also an RNA database. I've worked with RNAs also, so I use this very often, the RNA Central. This is also a subsidiary of the European Molecular Biology Lab, that is a EU database. Then these are some of the most popular web servers. Web servers they provide, these are hosted by universities. This is the Vienna server. It is hosted by the Vienna University, Austria. They give you certain utilities free of cost. That is, you can say this is the RNA Fold web server. This is the Vienna server, which gives you the provision to find out the folding. I mean, these are functions which you might need, which certain services which you might need. Like you need not write the code for your entire work. You have a lot of support from a lot of resources. So this is one of them. You have a variety of parameters which you can give in order to find out the folding, the structure of RNA. Then you also have the Rochester University, which hosts this one. This is also a structure prediction platform, and you have there are other a lot of other functions also, which are services also which are provided by this. Then you have the EU gene expression services. Okay, so these are just this again is actually just a brief mention of the resources which you have. Now, if you can make use of the right amount of the right kind of resources, your results will be very bright. I mean, the better the resources you use, the more help you get. And it is actually, these such resources are better than any guide or any consultant or any senior you can ever find. Okay. Now, moving on. This is some of the applications of genomics. This is, I mean, as I say, this is just the tip of the iceberg of applications you could potentially have. It is used in gene discovery, gene therapy, identification and diagnosis of genetic factors, which contribute to all common diseases, including the common cold to cancer, genome editing, prenatal diagnosis testing, the control of infectious diseases, development of personalized medicine. This is one key area where a lot of work is going on. That is, personalized medicine means like the medicines which we have now are generic. We don't have personalized medicine. So the medicine which I take for my disease, for one disease, might not be the same as you need to take for the same disease. Okay, so the medicine should be, I mean, ideally, even for the common cold, ideally I should be taking a medicine according to my DNA pattern. You should be taking another medicine for the same disease according to your DNA pattern. That is the end result of personalized medicine. So I hear that a lot of research is going on in that. You know, this slide, I have included this slide just to convey to you how big an effect a small change in the genome would bring about. Now, I've just cited two examples here of BRCA1 gene and the DMD gene. BRCA1 gene is one of the genes which are implied in the development of breast cancer. It is the inherited case of breast cancer. BRCA1 is a breast cancer gene. We call it the breast cancer gene. Now it is a very large gene, and the area analyzed is around 80,000 to 95,000 nucleotides long, and the locations, that is, you start from one location, you read, when you read and reach the other end, you have a count of 80,000. That is what it means when you say the length is 80,000. So in this BRCA1 gene, there are just two mutations, in location 185 and 186. Only two locations have a change, and in a healthy individual, this BRCA1 gene would have the nucleotide C and T, whereas in the mutant version of the gene, that is in a woman who is genetically predisposed to developing breast cancer, these two nucleotides are seen deleted. That is, this C is cytosine molecule, T is thymine molecule. The mutations caused actually distort these molecules in such a way that they are not detected. It is not possible to detect them as C and T. You have something else instead of C and T there. That is what it means. So actually what this means is that just think the size of that, because someone who is genetically predisposed to breast cancer can in fact get it tested whether you are genetically predisposed to it, to a particular disease. And just see in a gene which is almost 1 lakh nucleotides in length, just two mutations, just a mutation in just two locations can develop this disease in you. Okay, then another example I've included here is the Duchenne dystrophy, Duchenne and Becker muscular dystrophy. it is caused by the DMD gene. Now, this is also another inherited disease. It is actually passed from the father to the son. Even when girls might inherit it from their father, but they could be carriers, but or mildly infected. This is a very long gene. This is actually, in fact, the largest known gene in humans. It is around 2.4 million base pairs in size, and it has 79 exons. And it takes over 16 hours to transcribe it. So in that gene, in 30% of the diseases, it is said that there are just 2 mutations in locations 45 and 73. In a healthy individual, you have T and G. Instead of T and G, in a mutated sequence, that is in a person who is likely to develop Duchenne and Becker dystrophy, you would have the nucleotide sequence reading CA. So I just wanted to convey to you how big an effect a slight change in the genome can cause. Now we are concluding. As conclusion, let me say the implications of research results indicate social relevance of genomic studies and the benefits thereof to humanity. The implications are clear pointers to the future of genomics. So it is very apt if we say that the future of genomic studies looks bright, very bright in fact. And DSP algorithms we saw are not the sole means of analyzing genomic data. Nevertheless, we have seen that genomic data is very conducive to analysis with DSP techniques, and decisive results can be arrived at. Now, if you opt to work in genomic signal processing, make sure you associate with good publishers and journals so that your direction and progress is ensured. Also, while selecting web resources and software platforms, keep in mind the visibility of your work so that it is useful to the academic and the research fraternity. Now, I conclude here. Thank you all for the patient hearing. And for those of you who are interested to pursue doctoral research in genomic signal processing, I wish you the very best, and I hope this presentation did indeed show you the bird's eye view. And for those of you who aspire to pursue research and are weighing out your options, I hope this presentation made you move genomic signal processing to the top of the list. Thank you all once again.